minus the price buyers paid post-subsidy. We have the exact same story if we have a subsidy given to buyers. So let's assume now that instead of a subsidy being given to sellers, the subsidy is given to buyers. So for every bushel they buy, the government's going to pay them $2. What happens then? Well, if the government's going to pay me $2 for every bushel that I buy, that effectively raises the maximum price that I'm willing to pay for a bushel of cotton. So initially, I was willing to pay at most, along this light shaded curve, $10 for the 100th bushel, but now because the government's subsidizing me, and I'm getting $2 more to spend, now for that 100th bushel, and for all the other bushels as well, I'm willing to pay $2 more, in this case, $12 a bushel. But again, that's probably not going to lead to a $2 increase in equilibrium price because supply curves slope upwards. So even if buyers are willing to pay $2 more and still demand 100 units, at that $2 price increase, sellers are going to want to increase their quantity supply from 100 to 150. That's going to lead to a shortage, which in the long run puts downward pressure on price, and prices that we see will converge to this new intersection of supply and demand, somewhere in between 12 and 10, let's say 11, and a new quantity of, again, let's say 125. So now we have a new price at the counter of $11. This is the price that sellers are going to receive, and that's it for them. Buyers, on the other hand, get $2 off via a government subsidy. So even though they pay $11 at the counter, they're going to get $2 back from the government. So the price they actually pay is $9. The exact same outcome that we just saw when the subsidy was levied on sellers. So we end up with a price received by sellers of 11 and a price paid by buyers of 9. Again, this is no different than the case we just saw when the subsidy was levied on sellers. The only difference is that in one case, the supply curve is moving down, in the other case, the demand curve is moving up. But the end result, $11 to sellers, $9 to paid by buyers, is the same. The economic incidence of a subsidy is unchanged, regardless of the legal incidence of the subsidy. Now, the same way that we did with the tax, there's a shortcut, a subsidy wedge shortcut, if you will. And all you do is, you take that green vertical line, which measures, vertically speaking, the actual subsidy itself, start from the right and move leftward until it just touches the supply and demand curve. And at that point, that's going to tell you the price that a seller receives post-subsidy and the price that a buyer pays post-subsidy. Now, if you compare those to the original P-star, the original pre-subsidy market price, you'll see that the incidence of the subsidy, in this case for buyers, the economic incidence, is calculated as the price that they would have paid pre-subsidy minus the price they paid post-subsidy divided by the subsidy itself, which in this case is going to be, what, 10 minus 9, which is 1, divided by 2, which is 50%. Same thing for sellers. You take the price that they receive post-subsidy, subtract from the price they would have received pre-subsidy, so in this case, 11 minus 10, which is 1, divide by the subsidy itself, and you get 0.5, which is 50%. So in this stylized example here, both buyer and seller, economically speaking, pay half the subsidy. Okay? Now, look at consumer surplus. Remember, area below the demand curve, above the price paid, which is now a lot lower, up to the quantity purchased, which in this case I abbreviate as Q sub. So this is the quantity bought and sold post-subsidy. The triangle is a lot larger now than it once was because buyers are receiving a lower price and they're buying more units. For sellers, it's the opposite. Okay? They're receiving a higher price than they once would have. So, again, area above the supply curve, below price received, up to quantity sold, that's this green triangle right here. So both buyer and seller benefit from the subsidy directly. Now, of course, that subsidy costs money, usually via tax revenue. What does the subsidy cost? Well, the subsidy just costs whatever the subsidy itself is. I abbreviate that as sub. That's just the height of the green bar there, multiplied by the number of units bought and sold post-subsidy, which in this case might be $2, again, height of the green bar, times 125, which is what, 250. That's a typo. That should be 250, not 150. So, even though surplus for both buyer and seller increase, the cost of subsidy is going to offset some of that. And what we see happening is that there ends up being a little bit of deadweight loss right here, which reflects the fact that when you have a subsidy, you end up producing too much relative to the equilibrium quantity. For all these quantities, in between Q star, which is right here where the two lines intersect, and Q sub, the cost of producing those units exceeds the maximum price that buyers are willing to pay. Which means that for each of these quantities, society effectively wastes resources.